Okay, you're set.
Okay, we're back. We're still waiting for Senator Lyons, and we're going to take up the next item on the agenda. 21E09, Office of Professional Regulation, interim rules for clinical pharmacies. We have a witness speak to us who will identify himself and introduce, begin his testimony on the rule before us.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having me. This is Gabe Gilman, General Counsel from the Office of Professional Regulation, here to testify on the emergency rule E09. This is a rule captioned the interim rules for clinical pharmacy. As you can see from the paperwork, this is an emergency rule that is very short. It serves to fulfill the instructions given us in Act 178 of 2020. The act in question expanded the availability of clinical pharmacy services at the level of the community pharmacy. Such things as tuberculin skin tests, tobacco cessation products, hormonal contraceptives, etc. Through that legislation are meant to be made available through a pharmacist at a pharmacy. In the course of the discussion and debate surrounding that project, one of the compromises arrived at with stakeholders was that the Board of Pharmacy was to make some very specific administrative rules setting guardrails around the new services. They were told to make those rules in respect to 4 specific areas. And because stakeholders at the time wanted the availability of certain services to be effective in the short term and not in a very long term, and because we knew that the Board of Pharmacy was undertaking a top-to-bottom rewrite of its administrative rules that would take considerably longer, the General Assembly specifically instructed us to use emergency rulemaking to ensure that the rules now before you are operative by July 1, which we did. We owe a great deal of gratitude to our partners at the Vermont Department of Health and others who, despite the many demands on them, helped us get this through and done on time. The rule that you see was discussed, deliberated upon, and approved by the Vermont Board of Pharmacy, made up of majority pharmacists, et cetera, with full participation of almost every industry stakeholder who might have an interest, including the Pharmacists Association, the chain pharmacy associations, community pharmacies, and of course our partners at the Vermont Department of Health. So in many ways, the emergency rule speaks for itself. It's 1 1/4 typewritten pages. It addresses the 4 important subjects that you see there. I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee may have about it, and I hope that you'll look favorably upon this effort.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the witness? This is an emergency rule that was promulgated last fall. I noticed on page 3 of the explanation, which is perhaps a couple weeks old, it talked about breakthrough cases. And the number of 200 is that a Vermont number or a national number from 2 weeks ago?
I apologize. I'm not sure that breakthrough cases were discussed in this rule filing. Just looking at.
But it was in the explanation of why the rule is necessary, and it talks about because as of June 21st, there were June 21st, 2021, talks about kids under 12 and about 200 breakthrough cases, which I would assume is was a federal number back in that day.
My hunch is that we may have the paperwork reversed between this rule and the rule adjacent to it. And our rule is deemed necessary by the General Assembly because they instructed us to use emergency rulemaking in order to have the rule in place by July 1. I'm guessing the text that you're looking at may match a different rule filing.
Thank you. The question was not germane to whether or not the rule was necessary. I was curious. Are there any questions for the witness about the extension of the emergency rule with the changes set forth herein? If there are no questions, Senator Bray.
I move that we approve Rule 21E09.
It has been moved that the rule be approved as presented and as written. There's no further discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. And it is passed. Which brings us to, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
And we will keep our eyes and ears open on how this pandemic and emergency carries out in the next few weeks or months. Excuse me. Which brings us to 21E10, Public Utility Commission and the PUC emergency rule dealing with emergency disconnections. Which brings us to, thank you very much for your testimony. Sorry. Again, we have a extension on what rule that was previously set forth, and our witnesses scheduled are Steph Hoffman, Deputy General Counsel of Vermont Public Utility Commission, and Ann Bishop, Operations Director, Vermont Public Utility Commission. Who is available on Zoom to testify today?
Senator, this is Ann Bishop, and I don't see Steph Hoffman online yet. I think the committee's a little ahead of schedule. Would you be amenable to my trying to contact her and asking her to join the Zoom meeting now? If we could just pause for a minute or two, would that be acceptable?
If that works for you, that works for us. We will stand by, and I guess the committee will remain live. So while you're trying to get your colleague.
Thank you. And if she's not able to join in a minute or so, then I will be able to proceed without her.
Okay.
Do you want me to pick up the two rules that were suspended or?
Yeah. She's stuck on the elevator. While we're waiting for our two new members, what has been unusual.
You're live.
We're live. I know we're live. What has been unusual in the last couple of months is that we've been dealing with the extension of emergency rules. Usually the more detailed review of this committee is when rules are promulgated that are original and cause substantial or changes. And in the case of the rules we've been dealing with in the last couple of weeks, they are rules that were already put in place and are being modified often as circumstances, or in the case of the virus, as circumstances change, but they are emergency rules, and those last only 6 months and are considered differently than rules that have been around for quite some time. Ms. Phillips discussed earlier the rule that we're going to be voting on soon of rules that were promulgated, 20 years ago or thereabouts?
1994 was the last.
1990, more than 25 years ago, 26, 20. And they've been, that's a big change, and they were updated, and that's usually the type of work that we are asked to take a look at very carefully. Emergency rules are equally important, but the changes that are presented are usually incremental and based on what we have done in the last 6 months or so. So I don't know if there's anybody that's not watching a Red Sox replay right now that's listening in. This committee can have debates and have different opinions and exciting for those who are interested in those details, or it can be pretty much ministerial, which is touching the bases and carrying out our responsibilities. So,
She's on.
okay, we're ready with our witness for the 21 E08 health access care services related to COVID-19, the emergency rule. Will the witness identify herself, please? Welcome.
And I apologize, Mr. Chair, I was in another meeting, but this is Steph Hoffman. I'm a Deputy General Counsel for the Public Utility Commission. So we're actually presenting Rule 21E10, Public Utility Commission Emergency Rule 2.600 COVID-19 Emergency Disconnection Rule.
My apologies.
No problem.
In
Thank
getting
you
the
so
number
much.
wrong. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for your the opportunity to testify here today. This rule is the same emergency procedures rule that was approved by LCAR in October of last year, when there was a brief period in which the moratorium on disconnections was lifted in order to encourage different folks in the state that are in arrearage to participate in some financial assistance programs. So in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Commission had ordered a moratorium on various utility disconnections. Similarly, the legislature placed a moratorium on water utility disconnection during the pandemic. On July 15th of 2021, the PUC lifted the moratorium on gas, electric, and basic telephone disconnections, and the moratorium on water disconnections established pursuant to Act 92 of 2020 was lifted on June 15th, concurrent with the end of the emergency declaration. In recognition of the persistent economic consequences of the pandemic, this emergency rule presented today provides additional consumer notification requirements in order to encourage greater participation in the Vermont COVID-19 Arrearage Assistance Program 2, or VCAP 2, and the Vermont Emergency Rental and Utility Assistance Program, VRAP. These programs distribute federal funds, and the rule also provides enhanced consumer protections to customers who may be experiencing financial hardship due to COVID-19. So as I mentioned, this is the same rule that came before the committee last fall with 4 substantive changes. And all of those changes to the October rule are reflected in the red line that was provided to LCAR. The vast majority of the rule itself is text from the Commission's permanent rules regarding utility disconnection. And the 4 changes deal with the purpose and scope of the rule, just adjusting that to acknowledge persistent pandemic circumstances despite the change of the emergency declaration. The second is to add the VRAP program, which is a rental or tenant assistance program that didn't exist last fall. The third is to revert back to some of our permanent rule procedures, specifically for physician notes. And the reason for that is to keep in place the provisions that existed last fall during a period that we were going to go into winter seasonal rules as well, would actually work against the function of funneling folks into these assistance programs until perhaps they don't exist anymore next spring. And fourth, we bring the commission regulated water utilities under this emergency rule because they were previously excluded last fall due to the fact that the statute was in place at that time. So I will leave it now to questions from the committee, and thank you again.
Senator Bray.
Thank you. I had a question, and you alluded to reversions to try to get people into the program. So I'm looking at the annotated, or the one with the red line version. I'm on page 4. It's at the top of that page, and I guess I'm actually in. Well, so the very first line, our reconnection is limited to 4, and 4 is struck, and it says 2 consecutive periods, 6 is struck, 3. So can you just explain for the committee what those changes are in terms of timing, the purpose behind them, please?
Absolutely. And that, Senator Bray, is exactly what I was referencing in the reversion. So the strikeouts that you see in that version of the rule relate specifically to what is in our permanent rule, typically for physician notes. And if we had left the rule as it was in the fall, what would end up happening is, because someone could technically come to the commission with physician notes that carry them through until the fall, when the rule kicks in about prevention on disconnection due to temperatures and safety risks to folks if that disconnection were to take place, what would end up happening with the number of physician notes that are available under the previous version of the emergency rules, though the group that falls under both of those categories would potentially then not face a disconnection risk until the spring of 2022. If that were the case, then that same group of people would never have received an incentive basically to go ahead and engage their utility and get enlisted in those financial assistance programs. And so in order to strike a balance, we have, still kept in place the typical physician note requirement, but we haven't allowed for that bridge to occur where there's this essentially 8-month period where there wouldn't be a 8 or 9 month period where there wouldn't be a possibility for them to have to sort of engage and hopefully get plugged into those programs.
Great, thank you. So in essence, the shorter time period then encourages more people to take advantage of the program and get the support on their bill.
Exactly.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Senator Bray.
Mr. Chair. The Senate Natural Resources and Energy got a sign-off sheet, and on behalf of the committee, I had signed off approving the rule, just so that this committee knows.
Mr. Chair, if I could, Representative Higley, I'd like to
Representative Higley.
Thank you. I just have one question. It's on page 5, I guess, of the cover sheet, number 18, talking about notices of this emergency rule should not be published in the weekly notices of rulemaking in the newspapers of record. Why is that? What's the reasoning for not publishing that?
That's actually standard language from the Secretary of State's office when it comes to an emergency rule filing. The process for notice is different because the filing of an emergency rule automatically puts that rule into effect, as opposed to the normal rulemaking procedure where you have to participate in the newspaper notifications, the comment period that takes place, and then the subsequent ICAR and LCAR meetings. So it's just a standard Secretary of State language that's in there regarding emergency rules.
Okay, thank you very much.
So the standard procedure for emergency rules is to start them as quickly as possible, and then to allow committees like the committees of jurisdiction and the administration to make changes as necessary. And to publish those is both expensive and isn't going to change the result of the initial meetings. Is that a fair characterization of why that's not, to answer Representative Higley's question, why emergency rules are not usually published in a similar fashion to those where policy is yet to be determined?
That is a fair characterization, Senator.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions for the witness? No, Senator Bray.
I move that the committee approve Rule 21E10.
Thank you for getting the number right. I totally messed that up before. It has been moved that the rule be approved as printed and as testified to by the most recent witness. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. And the rule has been approved. Senator Lyons is not joining us, and the time is.
She's here. I'm here.
Senator Lyons is here.
And
You
I unfortunately need to run back upstairs.
Okay, so we have two more
Terrific.
to approve. I'm sorry, Senator Lyons.
That's-
I'm in a dream world here.
Mhm.
Senator Bray.
I move again that we approve Rule 20P21 as amended by and outlined by our counsel, Anthea Dexter Cooper, in an email of July 13th.
You've heard the motion? Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. And we have approved the rule. Senator Bray.
I move that we approve Rule 21E08, Department of Financial Regulation, access to health care services related to COVID-19.
Is there, heard the motion by Senator Bray? Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. And we have approved the rule. Thank you, Senator Lyons.
Thank you.
And I believe the next item on the agenda, we had a letter prepared for us on our behalf to go to the committees of jurisdiction. That we asked be drafted on the 1st of July and was sent to us recently. It speaks for itself, and it suggests that we've been asked to make decisions that are perhaps beyond the scope of this committee's responsibility, and that the committees of jurisdiction look at that, and you are to testify on why the merits of the letter we have drafted on that you have drafted on our behalf. For the record.
For the record, Jennifer Carvey, Legislative Counsel. Nice to see you all in person. So I have drafted for you a letter at the request of the committee to address some questions that came up during the discussion of the rules from the Agency of Human Services, those on the health benefit eligibility and enrollment system, and those on the healthcare administrative rules, specifically around home health services, durable medical equipment, medical supplies, and applied behavior analysis services. And in consultation with Senator Lyons, these are the provisions that she wanted specifically directed to the policy committees. So looking at alignment between Department of Financial Regulation procedures and rules for health insurance carriers that offer what we call qualified health plans through the exchange, and those procedures and rules that apply to Vermont Medicaid, including items that were included in each of those rules, as well as respite care that I think was not in the rules, but was fits in her with the category of things she thinks they should look at. Also, consistency of respite care benefits across Agency of Human Services program, so that they are comparable. You did not have a specific rule on respite care services, so the committee can decide if that is something you want to include or not. The extent to which grants, scholarships, and fellowships for necessary educational expenses can be excluded from Medicaid income calculations for individuals with disabilities, including figuring out which educational non-taxable funds qualify for exclusion and how much of the savings, if any, can be put aside for their educational needs. I think this question came up in, it was included in some of the rulemaking material around Medicaid eligibility. The extent to which existing federal and state laws would allow Medicaid beneficiaries' income levels to increase in excess of the annual increases that the federal government sets up through the federal poverty levels without jeopardizing their Medicaid eligibility. Again, not specifically the topic of the rulemaking that you reviewed, but there is language on Medicaid eligibility and financial eligibility in those rules. And then finally, the overall integration of healthcare rules between public and private healthcare programs to the extent permitted under federal law. Sort of a broader question. That's it. That's what is in your letter, and I'm ready and able to make any changes if the committee so desires.
So for the new members that we have to the committee, on occasion when we take testimony on implementing rules, we find that there are gray areas or further work to be done, and we write letters to the committee's jurisdiction saying you might want to take a look at that. And Sarah Lyons has assigned herself a homework to be done, and we're going to send her the assignment.
Right.
Okay.
It also goes to the chair of the House Healthcare Committee and the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, because health insurance is addressed in the Finance Committee in the Senate.
Okay. And the question is, would the committee approve the letter as drafted to be sent to the committee's jurisdiction? Do I have a motion? Representative Odie. It's moved that we send the letter. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. And thank you very much for your testimony and working with Senator Lyons to get that. Next meeting on the agenda, next
August
on
12th.
schedule, pardon?
August 12th.
August 12th. Is there any business that our members would like to bring before the committee? I hope we adjust to this different pattern as we go back to normal, which is not yet normal. Stand a break.
Hearing no further discussion, I move that we adjourn.
Senator Bray has moved that the committee adjourn. Right. Any discussion? If not, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed,